All right, hey folks. So today's video is all about warm-ups. Now, the goal of this video is to take you right from the moment you walk into the gym, right up until your first working set for your first exercise of the day. I want to run you through the whole procedure and talk about some of the pros and cons of things you can do, things you should be doing, and things you shouldn't be doing. I'll talk to you about some things that I found value in and some other things which I've not found so much value in, but might have some application in certain special situations. By the end of the video, you should have a good understanding of what is an effective warm-up to get you to the point of training harder than gym, because that's what it's about. You all know my approach: progressive poundages in good form with an effective bodybuilding range. To allow us to do that, to potentiate that, what is the best way to warm up to get the most out of the session? That's what today's about. Before we get into that, thanks for making it onto my channel. I am Faz. This is my channel, Fazlifts. I make educational content on the topic of getting jacked twice a week. So if that's something you're interested in and you haven't yet subscribed, give me a sub. For the rest of you, thank you for coming back. You mean the world to me. I really appreciate the support. And if you're interested in coaching, there's a link in the description. So the first thing I want to do is just give you a bit of a background on who I am. Okay, so I've been training for 26 years. So when I started training, I was a very young man and my body was very different back then. I was younger. I wasn't as strong as well. So my need for warm-ups was a lot less. I've been through the whole gamut of walking into a gym cold and going straight to my top set, to the point where I'm at now, 3 decades later, where I need a lot more warming up. So I've done the whole range. When I was a kid, luckily I started off with quite a good level of education around lifting because I had some early mentors and I read some books before I started training. And I always warmed up. However, in the early stages, the warm-up was more done just to tick off the box. I didn't really need a warm-up because, let's face it, I was a kid, was 17 years old, wasn't lifting very heavy. So I could have gone to the gym and just gone straight to my top set. Now, as I aged and as I got stronger, even right up until even as early as my early 20s, as I was getting very strong, there was more of a need for warm-ups. And I think that's where I want to place this video. For some of you guys, your need for warm-up will be less, for others will be more. But the point is, you should be doing the amount of warmth which is necessary for you to feel like you're ready to execute those hard sets. Now, physically is one thing, but also mentally as well. So the first thing I want to get into is the use of a general warm-up. So walking into the gym, I think a good practice is to get your whole body temperature up. All right. Now, this is less prevalent now as we're reaching the summer months. Now, that's drastically different from 6 months ago when we were dead in the middle of winter and it was just freezing cold. You were getting rained on and wind before going to the gym. A good way to get a general warm-up is to do 5 to 10 minutes on a cardio machine, just to get the body temperature up. I think it's a good idea. I think warming up the muscles, your entire body, is good practice for getting the best execution. Yeah, sure, it has some benefits for injury prevention as well. But specifically what I'm looking for is get the body warm so the muscles aren't cold. They can fire harder when they're not cold. Less of a need when it's the summer, but I think it's still good practice. Much more of a need when it's the winter, much more of a need to warm up. And I'd also say your own internal body temperature probably plays a role. I know right now I'm dieted down to about 80 kilos. Now, at 95 kilos, I'm a furnace. Like wherever I go, whether it's dead of winter, whether it's summer, I'm hot. Right now, 80 kilos, I will say I'm cold a lot of the time. So I think potentially there is more need for warming up the leaner you are, especially if you're not used to being lean. That I've theorized this over the years that I've coached, but I think that's a possible mechanism for injuries when you're dieted down. I think people maybe when they're dieted down don't really expect their body temperature to be as cold as it is. So when they go to the gym, they do their normal warm procedure, but perhaps they're not as warm as they would be if they had a lot more fat on them, like 20, 30 pounds of fat. You've heard of some of the famous cases of, say, Dorian Yates getting injured, hurting his bicep on the contest prep. Now, yeah, sure, some of it is you're weaker, you're more depleted, but my theory is some of it is possibly down to this mechanism of you're just colder. And it's important to have a full body warm up and feel warm when you embark on your lifting routine. So yeah, first 5 to 10 minutes, I think it's important to get the whole body warm. More of a need in the winter months, less of a need in the summer months. And also, obviously, age comes into play as well. I think the older you are, the more there is a need to get your body moving. Okay. All right. Moving on to the next thing. Let's talk about foam rolling. Foam rolling is something that was super popular about 20 years ago, I think. It's still popular in some circles. Some people, some PTs still really push the idea of foam rolling. I remember when I was fully into powerlifting, we're talking 2010 to 2014 time, everyone was doing it. Everyone would spend 20, 30 minutes foam rolling before they started a session. I never really did it back in the day. I did some of it, but honestly, I find it really boring. When I walked to the gym, I was full on pre-workout and I was ready to go. Lying down on the floor, doing foam rolling for 20, 30 minutes in a fairly relaxing manner. It just wasn't my vibe. I wanted to get in. I wanted to F shit up. So I never did it. Now, years later, I think opinions are split, but I think most people are starting to think it's probably not worthwhile. I will say for the record, it's not something that I recommend to any of my clients at all. So I don't personally believe in it. So foam rolling, I think if you do find some benefit from doing so, then fine. I'm not going to stop you. It's your body, your choice, right? But it's not something I recommend or do myself or have any of my clients do. So that's foam rolling. Now, the next thing to consider is stretching. So pre-lift stretching. Now, I think the common thought process nowadays is don't stretch because it impairs your force production, which I think is valid. I definitely think that's valid. And for the most part, I don't have people stretching before they work out. But that's not to say there aren't benefits in some special situations. So I'll give you an example. Squats. Let's say you're somebody who doesn't find squat depth particularly easy, but needs to do squats first thing in their training session. Even hack squats or leg presses still applies. Now, the thing with squats is there are quite a lot of joints which are involved in the squatting motion. So you've got your ankles, your knees, your hips, your thoracic back, and shoulders. Everything is connected. Now, what I found is when I was a powerlifter, I found if I didn't have the right degree of looseness in one joint, it would have upstream and downstream effects on the rest of my body, and it would actually change my form. So if I was warmed up and loose, everything flowed better and it just fit better. So for example, let's say my ankles didn't have a great degree of flexibility. Okay, let's say on that day, I hadn't stretched out my ankles, which is something I would do actually. That means I wouldn't get as much ankle flexion at the bottom of the squat, which means my knees wouldn't push forward, which would have the knock-on effect upstream of meaning that my butt would be further back than it normally is. So I'd be more bent over. And that would affect my squat form, which might also cause some knee pain. So you have all these upstream and downstream effects in a movement like the squat, which is such a large, multi-jointed exercise. And to a certain extent, this does actually apply for the hack squat and the leg press and other machines as well. So you have a situation where if you're not able to get that minimum degree of flexibility needed to have reasonable form with good depth, you might end up actually causing more aches and pains by not stretching. So there are certain circumstances where you might want to work on your flexibility before some lifts. This is more applicable the stiffer you are, probably the more muscled you are. You will see older, very muscly guys do some stretching before they go onto the lift to make sure they're getting the right form. That could be applicable for the squats, like we've mentioned, but also things like overhead press. If you don't have your pecs stretched out for the overhead press, you're going to run into problems. And that might have downstream negative effects onto your elbow joint and even your lower back if you're doing standing. So I understand that it has become the status quo now to say stretching before workout is a no-go. But practically speaking, you might be in more pain or more risk of injury if you don't stretch for certain exercises for certain populations. Anyway, we've talked about stretching. Let's move on to warm-up sets. So warm-up sets are, to define them, they are specific, lighter sets which potentiate heavier weights in the exercise of your choice. So let's say you're starting off a routine with a chest press. You'd start with a lightweight and you'd progressively build up. Now, I would suggest for the first exercise of the day, and it is different from the first exercise to later in the workout, I've done as much as 7 to 8 warm-up sets leading up to the exercise of choice. Now, you only want to do as much warm-ups as necessary for you to feel ready and warm and loose and primed. You don't need to do 8 just because I said 8, all right? Just so happens I'm a special population. I'm older and I'm still very strong. So my needs for warming up are probably on the higher end, but it's a spectrum. You might be on the lower end, you might be younger, you might be weaker, whatever, right? This is very often why I don't specify the number of warm-up sets for my clients, because It very much varies with how you feel on the day. Some days I need more warm-ups, other days I need less. It's just the way it is. So I always suggest you think on your feet. Go in with a loose plan, but think on your feet and make sure you're taking plenty of warm-ups necessary to get to that first weight. Now, in terms of how to structure this, let's say you're going to bench 2.5 plates for sets of 8. I would always start with the bar. That's something I learned when I was a powerlifter. Regardless of how strong I got, and at my peak, I was capable of benching 4 plates aside, but I still warmed up with just a bar. So start with the bar, then progressively increase the weight. While the weight is light, try and keep your reps relatively high. So my first warm set is normally in the region of about 12 to 15 reps. Okay. As I start pushing up in weight, the reps will drop up until I would say probably around halfway to my working weight. So let's say I was using 200 kilos for an exercise. Up until around about 100 kilos, I'm probably going to keep the reps north of 8. Okay. Now, as I start to get to the business end of the warm-up, my reps will drop below 8, maybe 6, 5. And for the final couple of warm-up sets, I will do as little as 1 rep just to prime myself to be ready to lift. You just want the muscles and the joints to feel the load. By that time, your body temperature should be up, okay? Your synovial fluid, which lubricates your joints, should be nice and loose. It's just a case of priming your muscles, priming your nervous system to the heavier and heavier weight. That's what it's about. You're going to start with higher reps, something in the region of 12 to 15, progressively drop the reps as your weight gets heavier, leading up to the final warm-up set and the first working set. And I would say one last thing, which I like to do, is one final warm-up set, which is 1 rep, potentially slightly over the working set. And again, this is one of those things where it's very much down to personal preference. Some people like it, some people don't. I find in certain exercises, it will help to make the weight feel lighter, the actual working set feel lighter. In other situations, if I'm already lifting a very heavy weight, like a bone crunching heavy weight, it might just tire me out. So in those situations, if I'm lifting a weight which is really heavy, I might need an actual psych up even to that 1 rep. So I don't tend to do ones when the weights are very heavy, but every now and again, it's not bad practice. Also depends on workout time. If I've done 7 to 8 warm-up sets for that first exercise, I'm probably not going to end with a over warm-up. I'm probably just going to go straight into the set because at that time, I'm impatient, I'm getting ready, and I'm good to go. So yeah, those are the warm-up sets that lead to the first working set. And I've talked a bit about the over warm-up as well. Now, just to end with, I want to speak a bit about the warm-ups which are necessary for the later in the workout. Let's say you're training on an upper lower. Okay. You've warmed up chest and you've warmed up back. You've taken plenty of warm-ups for chest and back because those are the first exercises for those areas, push muscles and the pull muscles. So you're fully warmed up. Now, after that, let's say you're doing some isolation work for the delts and some biceps and some triceps, a very typical upper lower routine. You're not going to need quite as many warm-ups for those exercises because 1, they are smaller exercises with less weight, and 2, you're already warm in those muscles. So for those, you might just do some of those primer sets. You'll take far less warming up, maybe 1, 2, or even 3 warm-ups. That's about it. Sometimes just even 1. Sometimes when I'm doing arm work, if the exercise is light enough, I might do 1 warm-up set as a primer, but I'm already fully warm, so I can just go into it. So you need more warm-ups for the first exercise, second exercise, and less for the later exercises. That makes sense. You're already ready to go at that point. So bear that in mind when you're thinking about overall workout length. Okay. So that is about all I wanted to say. I don't really have anything to say about what to do after the workout's over. I don't believe in warm downs or cool downs. I don't see the point when it comes to lifting. Like for other activities, for running, maybe sprinting, maybe. I'm not an expert in that area. I don't know. But for lifting, the only cool down I think you should be doing is maybe your post-workout cardio or walking to the car with your buddies and going home. Your body will naturally cool itself down. I don't think it's necessary for lifting weights. I think one thing you could potentially do post-workout is some stretching. Not for any particular reason, just because it's a good time to stretch. That's all. You're already warm. You're already ready. You can stretch at that time. So if you are interested in improving your flexibility, stretching post-workout might be a reasonable time to do it. Okay. But that's about it. Aside from that, there's not much else I wanted to say on the subject. So hopefully that will put everything into perspective. What is my thoughts on warming up? I hope that's useful for you guys. Right. I'll call it there. Let me know your thoughts and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.